joining me is a very special guest. He's a host of Keep It Batman related of the Badass Beyond podcast. He's also a comic book writer and artist. Recently, he has released Batman White Knight Presents Red Hood #1, and coming up here really soon is issue #2 of that. And he's also the very first Clay I've ever had on this show. It's Clay McCormack. Clay, thank you so much for coming on the Batman Book Club.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to do it. I'm excited to get to talk about what we're talking about today because you asked me, you just pick a Batman story to talk about and whatnot. And I was like, geez, everybody, I assume you've been going for a while. I assume everybody's hit all the heavy hitters at this point, right?
I'd think that, but just 4 episodes ago, so even last month, was Death of the Family. I think I might have mentioned that to you. It took 114 episodes to get to something like Death of the Family. And so I agree, yes, the year 1, Long Halloween, Dark Victory, those have been chosen. Granted, we can definitely revisit those at any time, but yeah, you had a challenge in a way. I feel like it's also overwhelming. 80 plus years of Batman. Pick one.
Right.
Let's talk about it.
Let's do issues 25 through 70.
Yeah.
Of,
sounds good.
Batman, The Shadow of the Bat. No. I was trying to think of things and I was like, well, Dark Knight, everybody does Dark Knight Returns. I just done Red Hood books. So I was thinking about like Hush or Under the Red Hood. I assumed maybe you had probably done those already. And then I thought about the Batman book that probably had the most impact on me artistically outside of The Dark Knight Returns, which is actually Batman Black and White Volume 1. It's a book that I came to when I was in college. I came into college looking to do comics. I went to an art school, I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and my knowledge of comic art pretty much was limited to Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, the Image guys, and Alex Ross at that point. And with some other stuff here and there.
Sure.
I was familiar with Jim Aparo and some of the Batman artists and stuff, but I didn't have like a deep well of art knowledge at that point. And a good friend of mine, who was also big into comics, turned me on to this book. He's like, you got to check this book out, Batman Black and White. And it was like kind of a revelation for me in terms of it being a book which I think is arguably the greatest collection of artists in a single comic book ever put together. And the fact that Mark Chiarello, who's the editor who put it all together, seemed to have total freedom as to who he got into this book, it just really blew my socks off seeing all the different styles, and especially as my art knowledge grew and stuff, looking back on it being like, oh my God, how did they end up with all of these guys in the same book? It's, Atomo is in there, Kent Williams, all these amazing artists that you would never think to see in a single book. And it really did kind of broaden my horizons in a storytelling and comic art way to see all those different styles in a single place.
Nice. So the immediate pressure got to you, and then you just took a breath and you're like, oh, well, that's easy now. It's Batman Black and White.
Yeah, it took me a minute to get there because I was like, well, I also wanted to think about something that maybe was a little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah.
And I think that book is, I don't know if it's, I think people who know it have it, hold it in high regard, but I don't know how well known it is at this point, because I think it's 30 years old in like 2 years. It's like 28 years old at this point. I think we're pretty close. And it's not really filled with mainstream stuff. It's a lot of off the beaten path artists and stories, and some very recognizable names and some not so much, but it's got some really great stories in there that are definitely worth talking about, I think.
For sure. I think before we dive into that, I have to ask you, since this is your first time on the show, what is your favorite Batman story?
I was just talking about this a little bit. I was at a convention this past weekend, and I was talking about Dark Knight Returns, And I said kind of in the middle of the conversation, well, I guess that must be my favorite Batman story because it's the only one I've bought 4 times. I've
That'll do it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the cornerstone to a lot of my comic book education. Mm-hmm. And it's always the story where if you're reading mainstream comics and then you pick up Batman Dark Knight Returns, you go, oh geez, I didn't realize they could do this.
Yeah.
So I would say that's got to be at the top. I also, I love Long Halloween is great. Year One, I think it's probably Dark Knight and Year One are probably my top 2 favorites. I know that's
the holy grails.
Yeah, it's a hacky answer to say. Everybody says it, but it's that way for a reason.
I get it. There's exactly perfect. There's a reason. If they're chosen so much, it's because they're that damn good. Long Halloween's my favorite. It's I don't know how many different versions I have of that, but when I get it, I understand. You don't have to sell me. I bought like every version of the Dark Knight Returns. I finally covered it the end of last year.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I was like, well, wait, does this version have some extras in it that weren't in the others? I should probably just get this one too. I should probably get this one too. There's going to be a whole Dark Knight Returns shelf on my Batman bookcase. So
yeah, the most recent one I got actually was it's all 4 issues separated, but they're all little hardcovers. And so they're in like a slipcase. It's really nice. It's a really nice set.
That is really the last one that I just bought.
Nice.
I bought that one. I was like, it's just a really cool format. I think I want that one. And yeah, it's that might have been the 5th version of that book that I got. I think where's those? Why did I need them? I don't know, because they just look really cool.
to kind of comparatively, if we're talking favorite Batman story across any media, the only movie that I've bought 5 times, I think, is 1989 Batman, which is, if there was a single movie that was just the core of my everything, really, it's probably that movie.
Yeah, I get it. I don't even want to go through of like how many things I've double, triple dipped that are only Batman though. It's not this other stuff. It's like Batman's the only one that I keep double and triple dipping and stuff.
I think Batman and Ghostbusters are the 2 that I just keep coming back to.
Makes sense too. Mm-hmm. Somehow that all just makes sense. It's all connected. All right, well let's get ready then and just go ahead and dive into Batman Black and White Volume 1. Now it's interesting. So from what I checked down, these came in, there were 4 extra long issues, if you will, released in 1996. And usually at this point, I always say written by this person, drawn by this person. As Clay alluded to already, the amount of talent in this first volume of Batman Black and White is insane. I can't list all of them, but there's some heavy hitters like Bruce Timm, Joe Kubert, Brian Bolland, Chuck Dixon, Neil Gaiman, still going through here, Matt Wagner, Bill Sienkiewicz, Denny O'Neil, Alex Toth, which he did the covers. Frank Miller did a cover. Kevin Nolan, Archie Goodwin, Brian Stelfreeze. Like, holy crap!
Yeah,
I mean, you kind of did a really good intro and why at the top of this talking about this, but the series it's just insane, and that's just volume 1, which I feel like they tried to duplicate it since, but nothing compares to that first volume of Batman Black and White.
Yeah, it's it's unfortunate because it's like I think the first volume is such a lightning in a bottle kind of book that the second volume, from my memory, is not awful, but it just doesn't have the same zip as the first one does.
Yeah.
And I think as they get into the later volumes, I think are they still doing? I know the most
they just
recent
did one last year. They just did a Batman Black and White last year.
The most recent one I have is volume 3, and that has Sean's stories in there with Scott Snyder and I think it was Scott. I can't remember. It might have been Jason Aaron or somebody else. I think Mark Silvestri did one of the covers. It's a lot more well-known names, I would say. People you're going to see on a lot of comics that you just see on the shelves, and that's totally fine. I'm happy to read a great Batman story from anybody.
Yeah.
But I think the magic of the first volume is just it's names you wouldn't really expect. Like, you know, Kent Williams is not the household name that you would expect to see on a book like this, or even Simon Bisley, who's a well-known artist. It's just interesting to see they team him up with Neil Gaiman to do something really cool. Teddy Christensen, who's a name that's a little bit off the beaten path. It's just it really is a nice kind of as in the opening little bit in the version that I have. Mark Chiarello does the introduction, and he said the origin of the book was he was having a desert island conversation with a friend of his, and the question was like, well, what would be the desert island? What's your desert island comic book? If you could make any comic book, what would it be? And he just started like being like, oh man, it would be great to do Batman with this guy, and I love this guy's work, it'd be awesome. And then he was just like, well, why can't I do this?
Yeah.
And so he put this thing together as kind of a passion project, and it's just full of really great stuff that I think is it's a bit of a gem, I think.
Yep.
If you're looking for Batman stories that are not necessarily top drawer, but when you read it, you go, oh, this is really good stuff. This, you know, there's only so much you can do with 8 pages, and I think some people do better than others. But I think overall, it's just a really great collection of talent doing really nice stories.
Agreed. So it was released in physical media in 1996. It was recollected. I think that I haven't stumbled across a hardcover myself, but I think it was released in a hardcover. It was collected and released in trade paperbacks. Since been released in a hardcover of I don't know what DVD or a motion comic maybe or something.
Oh, really?
Like 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was part of that collection. Digitally, it's available on DC Universe Infinite. It's also available on my favorite app of all time, Hoopla. So Clay,
Hoopla.
for this, yes,
I would like to back your pushing of Hoopla. Hoopla is fantastic.
More people are starting to learn about it, and I'm really glad, because they need the support so that it never goes away, because what a great app that is. And I'm not saying
really great.
It doesn't make me a cheapskate. It allows me to take risks on things that I love, and then I go out and buy them. So
sure, absolutely.
Hoopla.
I mean, it doesn't make you it doesn't make you any more of a cheapskate than going to the library, because that's what it is.
Exactly. Thank you. I'm glad someone understands.
And if you're like me, I'm sure you've, as when you were younger, got plenty of, or even still now, got plenty of comics from the library.
Yep.
First time I ever read the Dark Phoenix saga was when I took it out of the library.
Yeah. Libraries are great, people, even if they're digital, like Hoopla.
Yeah.
Anyways, which version, Clay, for this discussion did you read?
I read my trade cover, trade version. It has one of the newer DC logos on it, so I think it's a fairly relatively new printing.
Is it like the blue kind of folded in the bottom corner?
Yeah, that guy.
Oh, okay. That's
the one from like the mid 2000s, I think.
Gotcha. I checked mine out through Hoopla. My trade was in my archives. I wasn't able to get it. But mine's got, I don't know, I forget what era that is, but like that's a
little bit newer, I think. I just looked, mine says 2007.
Gotcha. Okay.
When you started going over the different editions, I got a little excited, because as I was reading mine, one of the things that I was thinking was I would really like to own this in hardcover. So it's kind of a bummer that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I really need to see what that was, because I thought it was kind of weird. It was at Best Buy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did a couple of those. So some, like, the DC animated movies, there was a little time period where they had them, and then they had the discs of that movie in the back, like the back cover. And there's something about it. I already own the movie, and I thought it was just kind of weird too. And I'm like, I don't want my movie in a book that's going to be on my bookshelf. I want it with my other movie. So I just avoided it. But I swear that's where I saw the Batman black and white. I think they've been collected in omnibus as well.
Oh, excellent. So, that would be worth getting, actually. Yeah,
I think so too. Do you remember, not the day and the time, but when roughly was the first time that you read this?
Probably 2000. I was in college, so maybe like 2003, 2004, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Doug Cowan, great Star Wars painter, does some really nice stuff. He had a much deeper bench of art knowledge than I did in illustrators and stuff, and so he really introduced me a lot into a lot of great stuff. And he knew I was a huge Batman fan, as was he, and he's like, you got to check this book out. And yeah, it kind of blew my mind a little bit.
I think mine was actually, I don't remember what year it was post college, so we're talking like a little over a decade ago, and I think mine was from the library, like a physical copy in the library. And I'm glad that I read it when I did, because I was in my mid-20s, and at that point I'd started to definitely get more knowledge of creators, artists, and writers and stuff, so I was able to notice some more names in that, as well as get introduced before knowing some were as big as they were. So I think for me, I'm glad it wasn't something, especially the stories themselves, that 10-year-old Ryan would not have gotten out of this what 25-year-old Ryan got out of this. So really appreciated that. And then I think you kind of already answered this, but in case you don't feel like you did, why Batman Black and White? When I asked what book?
Yeah, it was just I had a certain understanding of what comic book art looked like before that time. My understanding was rooted in popular mainstream comic art from the 80s and 90s. Your John Byrnes and your Jim Lees and Todd McFarlane's and whatnot. And I, as an artist, I never thought that I was never interested in inking stuff because I knew, based on my knowledge of my understood knowledge of what comic book art was, I knew how precise you had to be. I knew how clean everything needed to be. And that was just never the kind of artist that I was. I was trained, quote unquote, as a painter more than anything else. And so I always assumed if I was going to do comics, I would just be doing pencils, because I didn't know how to ink. I didn't have the temperament for it. I knew that if I dropped a blotch of ink on my page, I would lose my mind.
Yeah.
And so when I got to see this book, it was kind of a excuse me. It was kind of a two-handed thing that really opened my eyes into what was possible in comic art. And the first half was the very first convention that I went to, which was the Big Apple Comic-Con in 2000, must have been 2004 or something like that, where I got to meet Bill Sienkiewicz. And this is another situation where my friend Doug, he knew Bill Sienkiewicz, who he was, what he looked like. I didn't know what he looked like. The only reason we ended up talking to him was because Doug knew what he looked like, because he didn't have a sign on his table or anything. And so we went over and we talked to Bill for about 45 minutes. And he was amazing. And he just started doing a drawing. And he pulls out like this really gnarly flat brush that he's just dipping into the ink and just making these like big sweeping marks with. And he's got a whiteout pen in the other hand, and he's like doing all that kind of stuff. And I kind of for a second went, oh, there's not a right way to do this. You can do this however you want. It doesn't need to all look like John Byrne art or something like Slit. You can, whatever gets you to the end point, you can get there however you want. And then the other half of that equation was Batman Black and White, because I was just saw so many other artists in there who had styles that weren't mainstream comic styles. And one of them ended up being he's still my favorite artist probably to this day. He's the one I go back to more than anybody else, and that's Jorge Zafino. And that was the first time I ever came across his stuff, and it really stood out to me very starkly, all the different styles in the book. And it was just something that I had never seen before, and kind of opened my eyes a bit to what was possible.
That's awesome. And I also appreciate you. I swear I've looked it up and I always forget. So you probably had a little twitch when I mispronounced Bill's name.
Oh yeah. He used to, if I remember correctly, his business cards used to spell it out phonetically. So I'm sure he would twitch more than I would. So.
Okay. I mean, this is always a time, like I said it and then you said it. And I always like to go back to Lloyd Christmas and Dumb and Dumber. Samsonite. I was way off. Always great. So it's funny. You mentioned Jorge Safino. The way we're not going to talk about every single book or every single story included in volume 1. We don't have the time. You don't have the time to listen to us for 3 hours talk about that. So what happened here was that Clay chose 2 stories. I've got 1 story, and if we have the time, maybe we'll dip into another one that I have. But definitely going to get to Clay's first. And the first story that he had chosen was from issue 2, I believe, of Batman Black and White, called The Devil's Children, written by Chuck Dixon. Gee, have you heard of him? Illustrated by Jorge Safino. So, Clay, let's just go ahead and, take me through this, because when you said Batman Black and White, I know you didn't say, I want to talk about the whole volume 1. Mm-hmm. You specifically noted this story of the story by Chuck Dixon, Jorge Safino in Batman Black and White. That would be one I'd like to talk about. And then that snowballed into, okay, well, we can talk about Batman Black and White. That'd be a cool discussion. We can each choose a story. Maybe we have some more time. We can choose a second story. But this was what you jumped to right away. So what is it about this story that jumped to the top of your list?
Well, my ulterior motive, if I have one, is that I really wanted to talk about Safino.
Okay.
Because he is, I think, one of the best comic artists I've ever come across, and he is not quite as well known as I and a lot of other artists who are familiar with his work probably think he should be. And he has his style really kind of spoke to me when I saw it, because he kind of has this, he works, everybody who does this works magic to a certain extent, but he works magic in a certain way where the ink that he puts down on the page is both a mess and also perfectly real. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing line that he rides between impressionist and just sort of like blotches of ink that could be anything. But as you read through these stories that he draws, I never feel like you are missing details. Like he's got that sort of he's got a bit of Alex Toth in him, where he knows what you need to see and he draws the hell out of it. And then the rest of it is just sort of like, it's not quite abstract. It's a mess that feels like it shouldn't work, but it does. And it's almost abstract, but it still feels real. And he and Chuck Dixon had worked together a few times. They did a book called Winter World, which is absolutely amazing. And I think Chuck also wrote 7 Block, which is another book that Safino drew that's absolutely fantastic. And this story in particular, the thing that drew me to it the first time I read it is that he draws Batman like the Michael Keaton Batman, which is, he's got the same kind of like neck structure, and his ears are kind of similar. And there's one shot of the bat signal where they even use the 89 symbol with the extra little pokey wing at or ridge at the bottom. And so that was the thing that drew me in originally, because I was, a Batman 89 fiend, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, his work just really spoke to me in a way where I was like, this is a really different way of drawing. He lives in shadows. Like, he draws the shadows. A lot of other people draw the light, he draws the shadows. And some of his drawings are almost like he's carving pieces out of the shadow to show you exactly what you need, and then let your mind kind of do the rest of it.
When somebody's passionate about it, they'll definitely almost convince you of anything. But I mean, that first page of how you said, though, of it seems like it's stuff that shouldn't work. And I mean, that first page is a crime scene, and you just end up, I don't know, it doesn't bother you at all that it's the blotches of blood with the tags, like the police crime scene tags on top of them.
Yep.
And I don't know, because you also could, I'm just wrapping my head around it, because I hate abstract art. I hate it. Like I don't like it ever. But it totally makes sense of if you remove yourself from it, you're like, those are circles with rectangles. But no, I know exactly. In turning it to this page, this first page is like, oh man, it's a crime scene. There's a dead body, and yeah, blotches of blood all over the place. It's okay. And then start reading the story. Because
Right.
it didn't take much thinking to understand what's going on. Oh, Batman's at a crime scene. And to your point, that's exactly what I got when it was the Gordon and Batman meetup. And
yes, I love that page. That panel's amazing. I was just going to turn to that page. Yeah.
And they're side by side. Totally get. I mean, Gordon definitely doesn't look like 89 Gordon, but
no.
The Batman definitely looks like 89 Batman. And it kind of, with the panel above it as he's holding, the envelope, there's something with that looks, I don't know if you can remember, there was a piece of promotional, it was one of the earlier posters that was almost like a silhouette of the cowl with just a little bit of light hitting on certain angles. And that's what that image of the cowl made me think of right away too. Now, a lot of people may not know what that is. It's only because of watching the extras and they talked about the marketing in 89. They showed that poster. But I think, it's not a hard sell, because I was that, oh my God, like, he's influenced by 89 Batman, because that's exactly what I saw when I saw this page. And I think this is a really good story. Like you said, different approaches for 8 pages. Tell a story in 8 pages. And Black and White did such a good job of almost every story feels experimental. And in some of the other ones, I think it might have been Joe Kubert's one, it started off like, oh, this is just like Batman and these, but it morphed into something else. Or it was the fact of talking about bats and then morphed into Batman, and I'm all for 8 pages of really cool Batman looking like he's kicking ass and in silhouette and he's on a gargoyle. I was like, yeah, give me all those panels. But then this story in itself is, okay, there's a murder. We got to solve it in 8 pages. Okay, we've seen this before, right? But it stands out differently in, it feels definitely noirish. I'm hearing Batman, and of course it helps that this year the newest Batman movie had a little bit of Pattinson's Batman narrating.
Oh, sure.
Writing in his journal. So it's like I'm almost hearing that in the narration as he's going through it. And like it's a little bit of a dense story in the 8 pages too.
Yeah.
Of course, a master like Chuck Dixon will be able to accomplish that. And it's a great pairing of a unique style with Zaffino too, which I'm still unfamiliar with his work. Please don't leave the podcast right now. Okay. I'll track it down and I will look up the stuff that you just mentioned. But so you've accomplished both now in your career of illustrating and writing. So you just kind of let it be known how much an influence Zaffino is on you. What do you get out of Dixon's writing in the story?
Well, I think it's a really great little story too. The writing is really nice. The summary of the story, I would say, is it's a mob guy. It's about a mob guy who kills his competition by using the frozen, severed hands of dead hitmen to leave thumbprints to frame them for the murders, which is, when you say it all in one piece, sounds insane.
It does, yeah.
But the way that they lay it out in the story is really nice, because it's a really well-balanced detective Batman story. And as I'm talking about this now, I realize the other one I picked is actually very similar in kind of tone a little bit, but it's a really well-balanced Batman story, because you start off with this crime scene that doesn't involve Batman. Gordon brings the information to Batman. You get a little bit of Batman solving the crime. And then even at the end, it's not really like a big Batman smashing through the window, grabbing the guy kind of thing. It ends with an interrogation where like he's just been arrested. It's a very kind of like understated, quiet story, but it's a really well-written, a nice tight Batman as detective story. And my personal preference for Batman is someone who doesn't interact a lot with law enforcement. Like, he interacts with Gordon, but generally it's sort of like, they're kind of talking quietly in a dark corner somewhere. It's not, he swings in like Batman Forever and drops in front of people and never has a conversation before he goes to something. So this is almost like the perfect usage of Batman for me, if you're going for the detective Batman, where he kind of has this part of the story that he's involved in that is really fun, but is just kind of like a piece to a larger puzzle. It actually, as Sean and I on our show, the Badass Podcast, we were going through the Batman the Animated Series. The episodes that were always really interesting to me were the ones that were that treated Batman as kind of like a secondary character.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as I love the first person narration of Dark Knight Returns and all that kind of stuff, I think that gets overused a bit. And so I like it when Batman is presented as a bit more of like an imposing force on whatever the story is. And so you're not directly in his head, but he's more of a presence and more of like a feeling than anything else. And I think this is one of those stories that does that really well, where you can almost hear the whisper that he's talking to Gordon in when they're going over the different elements of the crime and stuff like that. And it's just a really nice, tight Batman story.
I mean, I'm trying to see here. Yeah, he's not even with. So you'd almost say the two detectives are almost the star of the story. They end up making the bust in the interrogation at the end. So it's not even like you'd said, there's no Batman crashing in through the window and knocking the guy out and calling the police or anything like that. He doesn't even but he made the breakthrough. And I just kind of felt like he made the tip off to GCPD of, hey, this is what's going on. They put it together. The evidence is there. Batman did all the rough work and he did it in the shadows by himself.
Right. Yeah. And it's not like it's all just quiet moments. Like there is a great Batman infiltration sequence. But even there, it's presented with such a level of drama just from the visuals.
Yeah.
That it just feels a little bit different. Like there's that one shot. I've probably ripped this shot off at least once in my own art, where it's that kind of shot through a room with Batman holding the flashlight up, and so everything else is silhouetted in the room except from Batman's flashlight, except for like the little bit of outline on Batman. Like that's like a perfect Batman panel to me, where it's just shadows, black. You get a little bit of Batman in there, enough to make out what's going on, just all mood and all atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Zaffino's art in the one panel, so it's the page, so technically it would be two panels after that flashlight scene. I can't make out exactly what's going on there, because to me it almost seems like there's a gun in the panel and his arm is up maybe, but then it looks like there's other hands.
Yeah,
that one, I read this twice. I don't know what's going on there other than the guys are in the room and Batman's there too.
So the top panel, I think he's like backhanding a guy.
Okay.
Out of frame. And then the panel beneath that, he's like whacking, basically someone came at him with a gun and he's like whacking him in the hand. And yeah.
Got it.
I will say, in the pantheon of Zaffino artwork, this is probably not his best work. It's not to say that it's bad, because I still think it clearly made an impression on me, but I think he's done better stuff, because there are a couple panels, and you're going to kind of come across that with his work, where you kind of aren't really entirely sure what's going on. It kind of takes a couple looks to see what's going on.
Well, I mean, also, it's not that I saw it and I had a fit and I said, Clay, we can't talk about this one because I don't know what happened in this panel. Story still made sense. It still moved on. He ended up kicking the guys' asses and he cracked the case. And what you said, I do when you say it out loud like that. Sometimes as us as comic book readers, we just read it and we're like, yeah, I'm in, and we just go along with it. And it's like, but if you stop and you do say it out loud, it's like, wait, what? Chopped the hand off, froze it, thawed it, rubbed it in oil, and then loaded a gun with it. And what? But it works. Yeah. It's a very unique revelation of a whodunit sort of, or a murder mystery sort of deal. It's twisted, and I applaud it.
Yeah,
thank you, Chuck Dixon.
Yes, and from the art standpoint, one of the panels that really kind of stands out to me as one that sort of encompasses the kind of feeling that I'm talking about of how his stuff is, Sean calls it organized bullshit.
Okay.
Is the page, it's the previous page, the one shot of the Batmobile.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you really look at that panel, great drawing of the car. Everything else on that page is just nonsense. It's just like a couple grates and just like a railing here or there. And, you know, the background isn't even really a background. But when you look at it, it reads as a finished background. It reads like it's a place and a structure. But it really is just a bunch of like, you know, cross hatching and some lines in perspective to make it look like the edge of a building or something.
So, I mean, you say that, and I mean, when you break down the context of the story, even it almost feels like, well, we know what we want the next page to be in the next panels. We need one panel to take up the bottom of this page, because preceding that Batmobile shot even is him going through images, you know, pictures of the case. Following the Batmobile shot, he's on a roof overlooking. So it's like, just insert a picture of a Batmobile, I guess. And then, like you said, the grates that can't support a Batmobile,
right?
And
yeah,
then
I don't even know,
a bunch of nonsense behind it, like you said. And it's but,
like, I assume that must be the Batcave, because like if you think about where it's positioned, there seems to be a set of stairs behind it, or possibly a ramp. So I don't know like how it got up there, if he drove it up there or what, but it doesn't ring false to me at all.
No,
because you know the point of the image is to draw a cool shot of the Batmobile, which he does, and that's nice and clear. But then the rest of it is just kind of support, you know. And even the next panel on the next page, where he's kind of overlooking the city on the edge of the.
It's a great image. I love that image.
That's another one though, where if you really kind of look at it, it's structured nonsense, because I'm not even sure what the perspective on that scene is. And if you look kind of like over Batman's shoulder, again, it's just a bunch of circles and crosshatches that kind of look like what a city at night looks like, but it's not really any sort of actual structure. But it all reads as real, because the mood and the impression is so dead on that it feels exactly how it's supposed to feel.
Not everybody can make convincing nonsense.
Right. I've been chasing it my whole career. Yeah.
Do you have, I mean, before we move on to another one, do you have anything else you want to say about this story? I mean, I think I do like the art. It's exactly like you said, it feels like to me, it's like it is messy, but it works.
Yeah.
In which not everybody can accomplish that. Messy is just messy, and it's incoherent even. But this, I mean, it follows. You just broke it down perspectives I didn't even think about. A couple of panels and stuff, and it's like, yeah, I agree, and also, but yet the story kept moving for me. It was a good little detective story for me.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice tight little story. It's not really reinventing the wheel at all. It's got a cool, like, the payoff is pretty interesting when you find out exactly, like, that's the real fun of the story, is finding out how twisted the crime actually is. This story feels almost like a precursor to something like Gotham Central, where the Batman elements are a little bit more peripheral than you would expect, and it's more focused on the cops and stuff. But yeah, if you're a fan of that kind of story, Batman story, definitely check this out. And if you check this out and you like the artwork, please look up more stuff by Jorge Zaffino. I recommend 7 Block and Winter World, and he has an amazing Conan story that he did for the Conan magazine years ago. Nice. It's really, really nice. So if you like this style of art, please, you know, check him out. And there's a lot of artists working now who, if you mention his name, their eyes will light up. You know, Alex Maleev has a lot of Zaffino in there. Tommy Lee Edwards, John Paul Leon, Sean Murphy, huge. You know, that was one of the things Sean and I kind of connected on right away when we met, was like, oh, we both love this guy. And so he's a little bit less known than I wish he was, and I think a lot of us wish he was. Everybody has their like holy grail book. I think mine would be one of my holy grail books would be a artist edition of a Zaffino work, but apparently his art is just so difficult to track down, because the people who have it for a reason. Like, it doesn't get a lot of big resale because the people just want the artwork. So it's a tough one to find, but if you enjoy it, definitely check it out. He's got a couple Punisher stories he did as well.
Is he passed on?
He has, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Unfortunately, but his son Gerardo, also fantastic illustrator, has a lot of his dad's style in there, and I recommend looking him up as well.
Awesome. Will do. I jotted down the Winter World and 7 block that you mentioned, so I'm hopefully Hoopla has them. They don't disappoint me much.
That's a good,
so
that's Hoopla. Interesting. If I had to guess, they might have Winter World. I wouldn't count on them having 7 block.
All right.
But if you can't find 7 block, let me know, and I have 2 copies. I'll send you a copy.
Okay, done. We'll talk after this.
Sure.
The story that I picked, in which I teed it up for you on, like, I was having troubles because I don't know that it's my favorite story in this collection, but when I first read this story, as I so eloquently said to you, it knocked me on my ass.
Yes.
And that is, it's the first story of issue number 4. I think it's the first story. An Innocent Guy, written and illustrated by Brian Bolland. Heard of him? The first time I read this, DC released a deluxe edition of The Killing Joke in 2008 for the 20th anniversary of that story. 2008, good year for Batman.
Yeah.
That was my 89. I was 2.5 when the Batman came out in 1989, so I didn't get to experience that Batman yet. But I got some in The Dark Knight. But
sure,
this story was included in that with some really cool extras, and
really?
It was colored. Yeah, it was colored.
I didn't know that. Yeah, okay.
And that's where I read this, and they gave, I think Bolland did the introduction to it. So this is after you read the new. He colored The Killing Joke. Sorry, I know we just did an episode of this a year ago, but a refresher, or if maybe people haven't heard, the Killing Joke, the Absolute Edition, is such an awesome buy. And it's really cheap for an Absolute Edition as well, because it does the original coloring on the original style paper, and then it also has Bolland's coloring in the more glossy kind of paper. And then it has Alan Moore's script, and then it also has this story included. I can't recommend that version enough, no matter your feelings on The Killing Joke, because it's so interesting, the different versions of it included, and the backstory and all that included.
That is another one. That is another one that's high on the list for me as comics that I kind of changed the way that I thought about comics a bit. When I actually got, if I remember correctly, I got Batman, Dark Knight Returns, and The Killing Joke. I think I got from like a school book fair, like one of those, you get the magazine with all the books and stuff. I'm almost positive that's where I got them. I could be wrong though.
Great.
And yeah, Killing Joke is, man, first time you read that, if you're not ready for it, it is a trip.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Brian Bolland's artwork on that is absolutely fantastic. And so it's good to hear that collection is worth it, because I was just thinking the other day I need to update my copy of that. So I might end up getting that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can track down a deluxe edition, that deluxe edition, if you want. I don't know if you've read both versions that have the coloring. Have you seen both styles of coloring?
I remember there being some sort of controversy over recoloring it or something. Am I remembering that correctly?
You're correct. I swear, does John Higgins sound familiar? Was he a colorist or no?
Vaguely.
I almost feel like it was some sort of rush job in the initial release, and that's why Bolland didn't get his coloring. And then he was able to color it himself for this version. And he said, this is the version as intended.
Interesting.
For that story, his coloring looks way too pretty and neat for that story. The initial one with all of that red and yellow blending and the orange, and that just works so much better. And this Absolute, it does it. I don't like a lot of artwork. I think it detracts if it's on the glossy paper. I like the kind of, we call it construction, but sometimes it's the newspaper type.
Sure.
That Absolute, that old style is on that newspaper type.
Oh,
and
that's
really
excellent. Yeah.
And it's like physical media still rules over digital.
I think they're starting to realize that not all printing is created equal when it comes to this stuff, because a lot of the reprints of old books, the coloring just doesn't work. Even if they're not recoloring it, the coloring just doesn't work because they're printed on this really glossy, like modern paper. So everything seems way too oversaturated, and it just feels kind of ugly.
Yeah.
But then the newer stuff I've seen, like I just got the deluxe version of Weapon X, the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like 11 by 14. It's a big book, and it's printed on really nice kind of more old style paper, and the coloring is gorgeous. It's really, really nice. Yeah. And so I think they're starting to come around to realize, okay, you know, put a little bit more thought into some of these things and present them as they're meant to be seen, not just what the cheapest way to do it is.
People will buy it, and the people will notice too. The new re-releases of Tim Sale, R.I.P. His Long Halloween, Dark Victory, the Catwoman When in Rome came out, the Haunted Night, but they're especially like the Long Halloween, they're reprinting it on glossy paper. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I've got the original trade, the original hardcover, the absolute, and all of that is the construction-y paper.
Oh, it is, yeah.
I'm like, that's the absorbent for the noir, for all the blacks that he uses, not glossy.
Yeah.
And glossy, it just takes away a lot. And I'm like, come on, guys. Well, I'll buy it. Don't worry, I'll buy it. Print it on the the other side.
Right, yeah.
All right, sorry. Detour. Let's bring it back. So this story I first read in that deluxe edition. Colored, whatever. It knocked me on my ass because there's an obvious image of Batman getting shot in the head.
Yes.
That could just wreck a kid for months on end. If I'd have read this probably back when it came out, it would have shattered my dreams. To see that, because it feels so detailed and like, I don't know, it's one of those images, it's striking. You almost feel it.
Right.
Never been shot in the head, thank God. But I don't know, it what an impact. So there's like number one. The other one is the images of Bolland does such an awesome job of making 1940s feel very mature.
Yeah.
I love his Batcave, and I just really wish I know we got a ton of covers from Bolland of Batman, but I wanted more stories from him.
Yeah.
Because I love his Batcave. I love that he uses that 1940s Batmobile. How in this one he uses Poison Ivy, he draws Two-Face, the Terrible Trio, and then Penguin on a typewriter with, you know, all that stuff. That looks great. And so that's another reason I like it. And then third is the story itself, and how you've got this guy, he's an innocent guy, he's a good guy, but then he just wants to do a bad thing.
Sure. And
I think it resonates with me continuously because I feel like there's a lot of truth in that story. Not me. I don't want to do something.
Sure.
I don't want to.
Sure.
I feel
identifying with the psychopath. Yeah.
You just wait. In a couple of years, they're going to be like, he admitted it. Clear back on the Batman Book Club. But I do almost think like there's a lot of crime and instances that happen because people, they do something impulsive, and then it is kind of like oh shit, I got to take it further to try and stay innocent.
Sure.
They go the next step because they're like, I've gone too far already. And I don't know, something with this is it's a messed up story for a couple different reasons. And so again, it's not my favorite in this. I just feel like it's such an impactful story for different reasons.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think I've read this story. Probably, I think I read it when I first got the book, and I don't know if I've ever really called it out since then. Okay. I definitely remember it, but I guess I hadn't really gone back and read it specifically and focused on it. It feels oddly timely, strangely enough. Because I was reading this and I was like, this kind of feels like the inner monologue of like an internet troll or something.
Yeah.
You know, because he's the way that he's talking about, I'm a nice guy, I've never done anything wrong, but I've always just kind of wanted to do something terrible. Mm-hmm. And there's something about the way that he lays it out that feels kind of, he's doing it into a camera, and it's only a couple decades removed from someone doing something like this on Facebook Live or TikTok or something. You know what I mean? There's a strange timeliness to the content that I was taken aback by.
Mm-hmm. And so it would be weird, and I would never say that I love this story because I don't love it.
Mhm.
But whenever I go back and reread The Killing Joke, I always read this follow up. I never skimp out on it, and all that. I mean, the opening page is 6 panels, and it is just it's all dialogue.
Mhm.
But I mean, the guy just, how does he say we're put on this earth with free will. We can choose to do this or that. We can choose to be good or bad. Sometimes I think most people are good and not bad, only because they're scared they might go to jail or hell or someplace. I think I'm like, if you stop and think about it, and it's not trying to go too deep with comics, but it's almost just like that's why comics freaking rules, because they hit every level of stuff. And I'm like, I think there's a lot of merit to that, of people really want to do this, but they're like, I just don't want to go to jail. It's not because they're genuinely a good person. And so I think his setting up before we really dive into this too, I don't know, it's plausible. And I think there's a lot of merit to it for a lot of people's, rationale. I can't relate to him personally. I know you said
don't try and backtrack now.
And the more I go on with it, the more suspicious I sound.
Yeah.
But I think it's just you go from that first page, you have no idea where this story is going to go. So that's why it also, and then it's almost like, oh my God, we're having fun with this. Yes, it's like it's more mature, but it's still that fun throwback to that era of Batman. Then boom, he gets shot in the head, and that's what's perfectly illustrated by Ballin.
Well, what's really weird about it is, like, the first thing that he talks about before he even gets to Batman is he's like, the first thing he came up with as an idea of a horrible thing to do is to kidnap a little girl and chain her up in a sewer.
What the hell?
Just leave her there to die.
Yeah.
And then he goes from there to, maybe I'll murder the Pope. And so there's these two pretty intense setups before he gets into the Batman thing, and that before they firmly root it into Gotham City. And I think it does disarm you a little bit when you get to the Batman stuff, because it becomes kind of fun and games a bit, where it's, you're getting these great shots of the Batmobile.
Yeah.
Oh, if it's, you might be going to punch Two-Face in the face, or making out with Poison Ivy, or fighting the Penguin on top of a giant typewriter. And then he brings it back around to the really dark element where he's like, and then after he thinks he's ready, I'd step out and I'd shoot him in the head. No one would ever find out it was me. And it's just like, that one panel you're talking about where Batman gets shot in the head is very, it's like, not, it's graphic, but it's not horribly graphic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it is very impactful. Like, the image that he drew, it's tough to look at that and not kind of wince a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny that we went from Zaffino to Ballin, because I feel, how do you feel about Brian Ballin's art? Because I feel like it would feel like his process is very meticulous, very specific, complete opposite of Zaffino's, who is
definitely
organized mess. Yeah. This is completely neat and tidy, which I think becomes even more maybe mesmerizing for Ballin, because the Killing Joke in this story, the types of stories they are, what happens in those stories, and you have a guy who draws such neat and tidy panels illustrating those dark, disturbing stories.
Yeah.
And it's like one of my favorite words. It's such a juxtaposition to me of, and I just feel like a big boy who's smart whenever I say that word too. But it's that part that's kind of fascinating to me too, which I know before we started recording, I was telling you, I really like the, hear behind the scenes process and stuff like that from creators. Because Ballin, I don't know, I've never met him, talked to him. I'd love to, but it is just like, how does that work? How do you make that work? I don't know how you feel about his art completely. If you're like, whatever you say is cool. I'm just like, I'm fascinated by his art with just 2 Batman stories.
Trash. No, I'm just
okay.
Kidding.
There we go. You heard it.
No, I've always really loved his work, and I think one of the things that has always stood out to me is how meticulous it is. Like, there's not a single line that's out of place in his work, but at the same time, it never feels stiff. It's always got some life to it. Like, you know, that drawing that he does of Two-Face is amazing. The way that he renders the scarred side of Two-Face's face is just awesome. And he's not like, he knows when to push it into solid black territory, and he knows when to do more sort of hatching work. Like that same page with Two-Face, that first panel has Batman jumping off of a roof, and he's just got a nice hard silhouette of the roof that he doesn't feel the need to go in and draw every line on the water tower there. He's a really good storyteller. He knows how to focus. You know, the more I work in comics, the more that I realize that the key is focus in image and clarity of image, where you have to pick the thing you want people to focus on. And it's basically what Alex Toth said, which is find the thing that you want people to focus on, draw the hell out of it, and then let the rest of it just kind of fade away. And he's really good at that. You know, he picks the things that he wants wants you to focus on. He probably sold these. He designed this story really well, actually, because he's got 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's got one page that has 3 Batman villains on it. No, I'm sorry. Technically 5 Batman villains on it, plus Batman 3 times. And then the next page is a big, you know, nice splash shot of the Penguin and a giant typewriter. What I'm getting at is that he probably sold these pages for a lot of money, because there's like every single page kind of has something that someone would want, except maybe the first one. But at this point, I feel like
that's a collector's item now.
It's a collector's item on its own. But like, as far as how to design a story that gets a lot of Batman stuff into a single story without it feeling forced, great way to do it, because it's all from this kid's perspective. So he can kind of wax poetic about all these different villains and all these different things that Batman might encounter. So that allows you to get all the fun stuff in, but it doesn't sacrifice the drama or the darkness of the story that he's telling.
Yeah.
I would love to know.
Points.
I would love to know how much that Batman getting shot in the head page would go for. I bet that would be a very expensive page.
I wouldn't even know, other than I can't afford it. But I don't even know what art like that would go for.
Yeah. My one criticism, I will say, and this is a completely personal thing. His stuff is so what's the word I'm looking for here?
Pretty?
No,
neat.
It's got a certain tactile isn't the right word. Textured in a certain way that I this is a long way of me getting around to saying I don't like the way he draws Batman's cowl. It's just I don't love the horn look on Batman. I like more of the smooth kind of ears. So like the very round head with like the kind of curved pincer horns is not my favorite look for Batman, but that's completely a personal preference.
I feel like he's got, let's see. And I know it's only because it's so up close. Okay, so when he's in the cave, sitting in his chair, there the ears look more extended, in which I only with that I'm like, oh, okay, the ears are actually pretty long. Other pages looks fine. And then I agree with you too. That was a point I wanted to make of just like devil horns almost or something. It's cool that it is so intricate and neatly drawn, but as for exactly like you said, it's like he has a skull cap and then attached these long horns on the side, and I'm like, well, no wonder a bullet went right through.
Well, funny enough, I actually really like the way the cowl looks in the panel where he gets shot in the head.
It looks like a little different.
Yeah, it's a little bit more smoothed out, except for the the brains. But
except for the brains, exactly. I think I've said everything I wanted to say on that. Do you want to move along to your next one?
Sure. The one thing I did want to call out that I find funny about this is that he uses the terrible trio, which is a real deep
what a pick. Yeah.
Maybe he also saw that episode of the cartoon and thought it was terrible.
I don't know. It was, Poison Ivy, Two-Face, Penguin. Hey, let's avoid from using the Joker. Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay.
To be fair, though,
terrible trio.
To be fair, though, that's definitely something I would do. In the Red Hood book that we wrote, the White Knight Red Hood, there was originally going to be a sequence that featured the Condiment King, but unfortunately it didn't make it into the final book. But so we actually, when we were talking about that scene with the Condiment King, we had batted around using the terrible trio, because that episode of the cartoon we both very famously disliked. And so when we were looking for a low level, like Z tier villain for Gan, the new Robin, to beat up in just like a montage sequence, that was the first place we went. But then we were like, oh, well, Condiment King, we could do that. But then we ended up changing the whole thing anyway. So as you do.
In the multiverse somewhere,
yes,
Condiment King was in the White Knight universe.
Yes. Well, I don't want to say he'll never be in there.
Yeah, there you go. Never say never.
Yeah, we'll see what
he might
happens.
make it. I hope so. And he becomes the darkest origin story of a villain yet. His mother choked to death from a hot dog that had too much ketchup, and she said no ketchup. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you got it.
I'm already there. Gee, why am I not writing comics, right? With
yeah.
Proposal like that. I believe your second one was the first story in issue number 1, called Perpetual Mourning.
Yes.
Written and illustrated by Ted McKeever. So go ahead, take it away on this one.
Well, I don't actually know Ted McKeever's work from anything really other than this. I think I may have looked it up along the way in years past, but I don't have a deep knowledge of his work. The main reason that I wanted to pick this one is, first of all, I think it's a beautiful story. I think like the dialogue on the first page is borderline profound. And the thing that stood out to me is, this is Batman Black and White, right? You're doing an anthology story. DC Comics is doing a Batman anthology where they've got all these different artists put together on this thing. And the first story in the book is by this guy who has a style that is very much not a mainstream comic style. And it's a pretty depressing isn't the right word, but it's a dark story. It's a very kind of Vertigo-esque Batman story. And I think it was really ballsy to start your book with this, especially when you've got people like Joe Kubert and Klaus Janson and Kevin Nolan, even Brian Bolland. I feel like Brian Bolland is probably might have been an easier sell for the first issue, first story, or Bruce Timm. The fact that they don't start with Bruce Timm, something that's instantly recognizable, especially in 1996, is kind of surprising. But it makes a big statement for the book to pick this story that is entirely inside Batman's inner monologue as he has to do an autopsy on a murder victim. And I think the thing about the story that really stood out to me is, I'm not a big fan of long, lengthy monologues telling you about character.
Telling you what to think, basically.
Yeah. I want to be shown character through action. And I'm not saying you can't have dialogue that shows character, because that's part of dialogue, is showing character. But what this story does, without really saying it out loud, is it gives you a look at Batman that tells you that every person that he can't save is arguably more important than the ones that he does save, because those are the ones that really get to him. And there's a certain he has a certain responsibility to remember these people who are killed. That is just this done through this really beautiful story of him doing this autopsy, and the autopsy itself is telling us a story as much as it's telling him a story. And he's learning about this girl who's been killed through this autopsy. And then finally he manages to give her back the thing that she's lost in this murder, which is her name. She's just a Jane Doe, and at the end of the story he figures out what her name is. Yeah. And he says, you know, it's something that I'll keep. I will remember you forever. And it's just it's a really kind of sad side of Batman. Sad isn't the right word. It is sad, but it's just a side of Batman that shows you that there's a big level of responsibility, and kind of what he does, there's a certain sacred nature to it, where it's not just on him to stop the crime, it's on him to remember the people who didn't make it and stuff like that. It's just, I think it's an oddly profound story for an 8-page Batman story.
I think so. I read this one twice as well. And maybe, I mean, you Mark Chiarello. Yeah. Chiarello. Okay. I started to stutter there. Like, maybe props if he was the one that was able to fight and get this to be the first story of this new series, to really let you know, like, this is the book we're making.
Yeah.
Because I totally agree with you. The Bruce Timm story would be the crowd pleaser to open up Batman Black and White, because it's got a continuation of Batman the Animated Series from the creator of the animated series, and this is what you know, and then to follow that story with this or an innocent guy, and then it would be like, wait, what? Instead, this is a good introduction of, you know, we're going experimental, we're going artistic approach to Batman. And yeah, the second reading of this, like right now, like I said, it's been a while since I've read these, so I didn't remember how this one ended. The second read of it was more enjoyable than the first, I think, because the first reading left me with questions to where I thought about them, and then I just went back and read it over again. And I really appreciate the approach of at the end, it's not Batman found the murderer, Batman found the ID of this woman.
Yeah. Yep.
So there at least is, it's and that's almost like what do I say, like an opposite deal of like, hooray, we gave her an ID, she's dead.
Yeah.
We know who she is, she has an identity. Yeah. And that's a victory, which is kind of weird. However, in it, and there's just dialogue that really just freaking works. And he says, where is it? A piece of the bastard's tooth, a DNA business card with a name and address. She got you, you bastard. A DNA business card with a name and address. It's, I don't know, there's something about, like, you know, like chef's kiss with that.
Yeah.
That's like, it's not poetic, but he says, hey, a piece of his tooth links to the DNA. We'll be able to find this guy that did this to you. In a totally different way that doesn't say any of that. But we get the point, we get it quicker, it sounds better, and that stuck out to me. But then I mean, when I got to the end of realizing the point, because I felt a little bit of like a question mark of the woman working at the diner, and and she said, that's Chelsea, blah blah, and then she's like, no, dear girl, and it's like she's crying, and I'm like, well, wait, what does that even mean? And I kind of almost missed that point of, well, the point wasn't like, wait, was the diner woman the one, blah, 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 what about the guy that murdered her? It's like, no, we're able to ID. There's some sort of closure here by being able to ID, but then it leaves enough trinkets for the story to continue in your head but he's got the DNA of the guy who did it.
Right. Yeah.
He's putting it all together as he's going through all of this. And then there's this whole intercutting with the dance. It also had me scratch my head a little bit at first. And then there's just a lot of stuff that sometimes, and it helps with these black and white stories that they're only 8 pages, read it a second time.
Yeah.
Always just read them a second time. There's many, I'm sure, that are like, oh, I got it after one, but there's some that are just take the extra 5-10 minutes and read it a second time. And I was really glad that I did with this one, because that second read did improve for me.
Yeah. I think when you get to work on Batman, you are everybody wants to put their stamp on it, right? They're like, they want to, this is what I think Batman is about. And it's I think this is one of those stories, but it's a very sly version of one of those stories where it's not about the vengeance. Batman's not about, and I think it works for me because I agree with what he's saying here as far as how I think about Batman as a character, where it's not about the anger, it's not about the vengeance, it's not about the villains, it's about the people. And the people are the important part of the equation. Like, Batman is there to save people. Of course, he punches people, and every now and then he'll surf an airplane between two buildings or something.
Yeah.
But it's like the having a grounded Batman, to me, doesn't all just mean, oh, he doesn't have lasers or something. It's you get back to the core of what the character is, which is a superhero. He's someone who had something horrible happen to him, and he dedicated his life to making sure, to the best of his ability, that doesn't happen to anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think this story does a really great job of refocusing that for exactly what reasons you're saying, where it's like he's got the information he needs to figure out who did this and catch this guy, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is the person who was killed. And it's just a really, really nicely written story where you get so much character out of this girl who was killed and from Batman without any sort of hitting you over the head kind of dialogue or grand proclamations about who he is as a character or what he's really about, stuff like that. It's all in the subtext, and it's all in the way he tells the story. But then you also get lines like this, which I read twice because I was like, man, this is like on the first page, where I'm not entirely sure who he's talking to on the first page. If he's talking to I think he might be talking to the reader. But he says, "Tell me, dear soul, is it true that we live only in a dream at a dizzying speed and then move on to leave space for others for whom we must leave a clean place setting?" And something about that really just, I was like, man, I was not expecting a deep study about
deep.
the nature of life on Earth and existence on the first page of Batman.
It's almost like those really weird moments you'd have where you just, for whatever freaking reason, your mood is just kind of like, how am I here? What am I here for?
Yeah.
Where am I going? What, and you just start, all of that collapses on you. It's like, yeah, that's kind of what that is right there. It's like, holy shit.
And it seems kind of, I think on first blush it could seem a little bit over the top, but the next thing it says is, does the individual count for nothing? Are we only preserving the general features of humanity, the broad brushstrokes? And it all leads into this idea that this girl's identity is very important, and that and among all of the crazy things that are happening in the world, someone needs to remember this person. Yeah. And it's up to Batman to be the person who does that. And it's just I just think it's a really beautiful story.
Yeah. I don't think I can add anything smarter and better. I mean, he's doing an autopsy, and he's taken us along for it of the revelations of how he's able to piece this stuff together because he's the world's greatest detective. I just kind of feel like they give us enough for how he's justifying of the story of how it went down. That's what happened. Yeah, because he's Batman.
And it also takes away this idea that Batman is just cold. Yeah, which I have, depending on my day, I have different feelings about. But he's, the way that he presents this autopsy scene is, again, it's almost kind of, he literally presents it as a dance. He needs to, it's something that the two of them have to do together to reach this outcome. And there's a certain almost like ritualistic element to the way that he does this. Yeah. And it's really nice to see that a Batman who is well aware that the things he's doing have meaning and have weight, and it's not just kicking down doors and throwing the Joker out of a window or something. There's weight to the small things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about the art? Is it your kind of thing? Because this is another story where when I read it the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, I didn't realize that comic art could look like this, because it's not
great.
I really like, I mean, it is an aesthetic that I enjoy. But I can see why it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea. But it's, you know, I think it's actually kind of similar to the Zaffino stuff, where it is fairly impressionistic and lots of big shadows and stuff. But again, for the first story in Batman Black and White, picking this kind of art style is a pretty bold move, I think.
Well, I think it's interesting. And so what do I mean by it's not great I mean, it's completely unfair to look at this and be like, man, that's not Jim Lee, that's not Brian Bolland, that's not Klaus Janson. It's like, yeah, no shit, like, come on. But there's like the first panel is, you know, outside of the morgue, and you know, and it is giving you a lot of, you know, buildings, telephone lines, the street lights, it looks like a garbage trucks and other vehicles, and then it takes you inside of that and you see all these, you know, there's like a bunch of trash on the floor in the room and all these appliances. And then it goes from that to, I mean, the panel where it just looks like he took like a black marker and did an outline of Batman. Didn't color him in or anything. It jumps a little bit back and forth where it seems like not extremely detailed, but kind of, to very simplistic. It's not like I almost am like I'll buy any Batman book to give it a shot, because it's Batman. I want to read anything that's Batman.
You
know, you get a long line, and I have, I don't know, let's imagine there's a whole book that's like this. I have $20 and only $20 that I can buy one Batman book. And I open up and I look at this, and then I do look at stuff that does look prettier and stuff with Batman, then I'd be like, I probably would go for the prettier.
Sure.
I feel like that's the advantage of comic books, that a bad story, but you got fantastic art, like people are going to be kind of duped by the art. Then you go to this where it's like, no, this wouldn't be my first pick on the art, but then you do read that story. And this could hold so much better weight than that pretty looking book that I would read once and be like, well, that story kind of sucked. I mean, the art was cool. But this gets me to read it a second time, gets me to read it a third time.
Right.
So then in the end, it's kind of like, you know, story matters, art matters. I mean, what am I doing here? Like preaching like, hey, comic books. But I just feel like that's something with this of, it's not my favorite art, but the story makes it better to me. For sure.
I think that regardless of whether or not it's your taste, I think the art style fits the story.
I agree.
Like, if this was a really glossy modern comic book version of the story, I don't think it would ring I don't think it would resonate as much for me, because it's a really dirty story. And I mean that just like, you know, grimy dirty, not like, you know, sexual dirty. And it needs an appropriate art style for that story. And I think this Ted McKeever's art it's rough, it's gritty, and it's I hesitate to say unrefined, because I think there's a lot of refined technique in what he's doing. But on first glance, it feels unrefined. It feels a little bit kind of primitive. But I think it is the right style for the story that's being told.
Yep, I'll agree with that. There is pairings, and so props to, I don't know, I guess, like, granted, this is the same guy illustrating it, it's the same guy who's writing. But you know, there's other cases of, you know, Dixon and Zaffino, of credit to whoever paired that up. Of I think that you two for this story work great, as opposed to I don't know. I mean, I did just say Bolland's art is almost, it's very pretty for such a dark and disturbing story, but I don't know, even that. I mean, and I go to Jim Lee because I just feel like a lot of people right now still put Jim Lee at, you know, he's A-lister, he's one of the best artists in the medium and all that. But I mean, you think of Hush, you know, his story Hush, which is like his, you know, magnum opus almost, and it's like, how dirty was that story? And his stuff is so pretty that, I don't know, like, yeah, exactly like you're saying, for this very mature and I just keep saying dirty story. I just took a long way of taking what you just said and trying to make it sound like I was saying something different.
Well, I think if you look at
I talk a lot.
if you look at the Brian Ballin story and then you look at this story, one of the things I said about the Brian Ballin story was, he structured it in such a way that allows him to draw like big money splash things where it's like we've got Two-Face and we've got the Penguin and all this other kind of stuff, like stuff that are definitely eye-catching, gonna draw a reader into the things Batman readers want to see, right?
Yeah.
I hate to just boil it down to money. I don't know how much you're going to get for a Ted McKeever page of Batman doing an autopsy.
Yeah.
That's not to say they shouldn't go for it, because I would buy that in a second. Like I love it. But as far as, again, it's what I was saying, why I think it's such a bold move to put this first in the book is there's nothing splashy in Batman about this story at all. Like even the Zaffino story had some splashy, you get a nice shot of the Batmobile, you get Batman beating some guys up and stuff, you know, but this one, it's very quiet, it's very small, but it's just really, really well done, I think.
Which I feel like for both of your stories, like it definitely,
I think at the very least, it gives you a sense of what I like in Batman.
Yeah.
Because as we were talking about, they're kind of both occupy the same space of like this quiet, removed Batman who's sort of more of a shadowy presence than anything else. One
definitely shows why you chose the other. I think with the two that you picked. We're pushing it on time. I want to respect your time. So my other one that I chose, and we don't have to go into it, is the one that followed this. It is the Bruce Timm story.
Oh yeah,
Two of a Kind. I love it. That probably is my favorite. It's also possibly the most comfortable story in this first volume.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's it too. It feels a little safe, even though it's funny because it feels like it's the animated series episode that Bruce Timm proposed and got shut down on.
Oh, is it really? I didn't know that.
Oh, no. I'm saying it feels
you're
that
saying
way.
just yes, sure.
Because
yes, I can see that.
It's mature. It goes further than the series did.
Yes.
It maybe feels the most noir of the animated series, I think. I've got that vibe completely with it. But I mean, with the murder, the twin and the blood on the wall, now it's just the two of us. Two-Face, Harvey burning his own face and then killing her at the end. All of that was just like, yep, this one that made it on Fox back in 1993.
Yes. But honestly, though, one of the things that stood out to us when we were covering the show on the podcast is that they did stuff on that show that I was surprised that they did in a kid's show. And I'm not saying like, nudity or violence or stuff, but they were telling some fairly adult stories.
Yeah.
Like the one we always call out to is in that regard is the one that's about Rupert Thorne and his brother. Or maybe it's not Rupert Thorne. It's a crime boss and his brother.
I just watched it.
Yeah.
It's Never Too Late.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's the brother who's the priest who gets his leg run over by the train. Like that's not a kid's story, that's
there's no fun villains, there's no big props. This is about two old guys.
no child's favorite Batman villain is emotionally compromised mob leader, So that being said, this probably does push it a little bit too far for the cartoon.
Yeah. But the design, I think there's just, you can strengthen why the animated series is so many people's favorite interpretation of Batman. I would never argue. It's great. And this is a little bit of a continuation with that, maturing it a little bit more twisted. Makes you feel, because I think a lot of us do feel for Harvey Dent. We want him to make it on the other side. I think we knew where this story was going as soon as it opened up, and it's like, hey, I'm fixed. It's like, it's for 5 more pages.
It's the only place every Two-Face story goes when he gets fixed. It's the inevitable ending of that story every time is that eventually
he will be Two-Face again.
Yes.
So not a whole lot to say. It's not deep. It's pretty straightforward. But yeah, that was that had been my second pick and possibly my favorite amongst a ton of great stories in black and white.
It's just, and that's not to say that everything in here is A+, because there's some stuff that just doesn't hit me the way some other ones do. Like I am a gigantic Bill Sienkiewicz fan. He's probably my number, in my top 3 favorite artists. Every time I flip to his story, I just flip past it because it's so dense. It's like so much lettering and so much reading, and it seems kind of impenetrable to me. And I think I've read it once when I read through it, and I've never gone back to it really. I'm sure it's probably great, but it's just a little bit much for me.
I read it. I know I read it, and I was like, "This is not my favorite." This is not the
it's
one
a
I'm
lot.
picking.
It's just a lot of musing, I feel like, if I remember it correctly, and it's just very densely packed, and it's kind of off-putting just to look at because it's so densely packed lettering wise. You've got like, there's one page that is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 panels. Ugh. And most of it is lettering, and it's just it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a Walt Simonson story in here that's like kind of a robot future Batman or something. That's not really my cup of tea. I love Walt, but that's that story didn't really do much for me. There's other stories in there that are like that are great. The Kevin Nolan story is really nice. The Gary Gianni and Archie Goodwin story is really fun. I would recommend it to anybody who's looking for a little bit of a different, off the beaten path take on Batman by some really kind of undeniably great talents.
Yep. It sounds like a lot for this show. I was really glad a friend came on, Eric Carter, and he chose a book that I told him, I said, all these episodes in, and this is the first. This is a book that I think I know I don't really like it. But you really do. Let's have a good conversation about it. So we were both excited to have that.
Yeah.
I brought up points why I didn't, and he was like, I can see that. He brought up points of why he liked it, and I said, I can see that. I also had things I did like with it, but in the end, I was like, I kind of don't like it. I'm Batman's biggest apologist, yet biggest critic.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a really weird, I don't know. And with that, it's like, even with, so you just mentioned, Bill S. We'll call him Bill S. His story, I'm not really a big fan of it. And there's a couple others in here that I'm not necessarily a big fan, but I would not hesitate in telling someone, like, read Black and White.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Judge it for yourself. You may not appreciate, but sometimes when you get stuff, you can be like, I don't really like it, but I appreciate the ambition, the what you were going for. The story itself had some parts in it that were cool, but overall didn't. I don't know. It's great. It's a good experimental with pieces of brilliance in it. I think so. If somebody has dodged it this long, find it. You can find it anywhere. I told you, DC Universe, Infinite, and Hoopla, our favorite app, Hoopla.
Yes,
you can find it. You got it.
And I'm glad that they're still doing it, because that greatly increases my chances of maybe being in it one day, which would be amazing.
It's a requirement now. The next volume, you've got to.
Yeah, I got to do it. I got to figure
in the
out
DC
how to make
world
it happen.
now.
Yeah, yep. I got to find some weird twisted Batman story to draw really aggressively.
Yeah, there you go. So usually I end each episode with 3 questions.
Sure.
I don't know how to do this with short stories though.
Oh, okay. We'll figure it out.
So, do you have a favorite part? You can say,
I have a favorite part
of either story.
Yeah.
That we've talked about.
I think my favorite part is probably the ending of the Ted McKeever story.
Okay.
Because I feel like that one, the way it's structured, you're kind of along for the ride until you get to the end, and then you really see what it's about. Like, it's not a mystery really. Like, what you're reading is not a mystery that you're trying to solve. You're just sort of like along for the ride as you see Batman go through these different actions. But it's not until you really get to the end and you have that moment where he finds out what the girl's name is, and he kind of brings it all back about how he's going to keep it inside himself forever, that you really see what the story's about. And I just think it's plotted and crafted very well.
Nice. Mine's weird, but sometimes it's whatever pops in your head. So the Bruce Timm story, as Harvey gets out of Arkham, he says, a well-connected friend of mine arranged to have me smuggled out the rear entrance to avoid the media circus outside. Next panel, he's shaking hands. Thanks for everything, Bruce. Shaking hands with Bruce Wayne. And that's, I could hear it in one of the animated series episodes. I think it's when Harvey's going to get the operation on his face. And he says something about like, Bruce, he's always been there. He's always been a good friend or something like that. And that is such a, the really cool thing people like to put online of Bruce Wayne should have just put his money in Gotham and not suited up and beaten that stupid thing that goes around all the time. It's a good detractor to that. And of like, I don't like, that's the Bruce Wayne character of his faith in people and the ways he is trying to help, like, quietly, not attention, which to me just feels much more genuine. It's an odd moment that sticks out, but I mean, of the two stories I picked, I don't know, and it's 2 panels. But then in the next panel, he even says, oh, good old Bruce. But then you see Batman in silhouette on the building behind him as he's walking. He's keeping his eye on him. But it's not for like, I'm waiting for him to slip up so I can kick his ass. It's, I'm looking out hoping that this is it, which makes the Harvey Dent character tragic. Like his whole story always so tragic anyway, but we're so drawn to it to keep revisiting it. All right, I'm going on way too long here. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say I love the quieter behind the scenes Bruce stuff, because my favorite version of Bruce Wayne, well, one of my favorite is the 89 version of Bruce Wayne, where it's like nobody even really knows who he is. He's a rich guy that people kind of talk about, but he's not the face everybody knows the way he's portrayed most of the time now. He's just kind of like, he's an eccentric weird millionaire who just happens to give reporters a grant when they ask for it facetiously.
Yeah, exactly. 6 is good. I don't know. 6 is good. Do you have a favorite panel of the stories we talked about?
I think my favorite panel is probably, I think it might be that shot of Gordon and Batman from the Chuck Dixon Zafino story, or the one where he's perched up on the roof there, because it's like, that's an iconic look of, that's the Batman that I see in my head when I want to draw him. It never comes out looking like that, but that's what I always want it to look like. And it's it's just a great Batman shot.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, hard to argue. Mine, it's the innocent guy, Batman in the Batcave. Love Batcave shots. Give me all day, every day. I love them. So and then Master like Bowen draws them, and it's great.
What's nice about that too is that I feel like more often than not now, when you get a Batcave shot in a book, it's like an 8-page fold out spread where they have to draw the biggest, widest shot of the Batcave you've ever seen in your life, where you can see everything. And the Bolin one is just, nice little tight close up of the Batcave. You get to see the dinosaur and shit, but it's not, doesn't go too over the top. Isn't like 3-point perspective where it just makes my chest hurt when I look at it. So
I like those, but I agree with you. I don't need that.
Yeah.
I like you said, this small rectangle, it's got enough trinkets in there. It's got that old Batmobile in the back. It's got the dinosaur and the penny. Those are the requirements.
Yeah.
Got them. There you go. Would you like to see your stories or all of this volume or something adapted in animation?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. I'm going to say yes, because I think these stories, I love a good anthology. Like probably my favorite episode of Batman the Animated Series is Legends of the Dark Knight, where the 3 kids are telling the stories about the different kinds of Batman. I'm a sucker for different costumes and different versions of people and stuff. But I would only want to see it if they could stay true to the art styles for each one. Because one of the things that kind of bums me out about a lot of the adaptations they do now is they are adapting stories that have very specific art styles, and they kind of sand off a lot of the edges and kind of just make it look like the animated style that they do for all these movies now. And it always kind of bumps me out a bit, because like Gotham by Gaslight, I would love to see that animated and look like Mike Mignola's work. Or honestly, Long Halloween really bummed me out. I tried to watch it, but it was like, I mean, you couldn't animate Tim Sale's style. That would have been amazing. Like he doesn't have a complicated style really to animate. It's not like got a lot of lines or anything. It's very graphic and very kind of blocky. And I think that's a big part of the fun, is seeing the different styles of art. So I would like to see it adapted if they could approximate the art styles as much as possible.
It's funny because that's like I think a recurring comment that I hear from creatives.
Oh, really?
That I've gotten to talk to this year. I've got to talk to you. I told you I got to talk to Sean Murphy recently. I got to talk to Lieber Mayo earlier this year.
Cool. Excellent.
And those are definitely similar comments. Did you ever see the animated movie Gotham Knights in 2008?
I think so. I think I watched it at the time. I can't remember exactly.
It's like they did an anime approach of that Legends of the Dark Knight episode. And it was
sure. Yep.
5 or 6 stories. I think 5. And each short one was a different writer, different art style, anime, but every single one looked vastly different from each other.
Yeah.
I don't think it was widely received like well. And I'm kind of like, oh man, I think it's kind of brilliant. It was just different, which is cool. And I think that is echoing what you said. That is definitely like, if they attempted black and white, do it that way.
Yeah.
Because they are like 10, 12-minute stories. In each one, it looks vastly different and is completely different story-wise. They don't connect. They're not, right. It's just its own thing. And I think that approach is how you could do Batman black and white. I don't think that they would ever do an animated series only in black and white. I don't think that would ever happen.
That's the other thing. If they were going to do it, they would need to keep it black and white. Which they probably would not do. But I was actually just thinking, as you were saying that, it would be a great project for like a college animation course.
Yeah.
To be like, pick a story out of this book, animate this, and try to stay as close to the style as possible. Yeah. To get like a nice kind of show reel or something out of it.
I mean, it'd have to be cheaper by using only black and white and gray, right?
Probably, yeah.
So there you go. It's a little less risky because it shouldn't cost you as much. I don't know. What do I know? I don't make cartoons for a living. Clay, that's it. That's my last question for you.
Cool.
So again, thank you so much for coming on here and talking to you. Went longer, as is my problem, always longer than I tell you. So really sorry about that.
I'm used to it on my own shows. We always blow right through whatever the timestamp I think is going to be.
Yeah. So please plug away where anyone and everyone can follow you, what you're working on, whatever you want to plug.
Sure. Currently I Batman White Knight Presents Red Hood, which I co-wrote with Sean Murphy, is I don't know. I think by the time this comes out, both issues will be out probably.
It should be coming out in a couple days when this drops.
Okay, so I think that it's a 2-issue.
Yeah,
it's a 2-issue miniseries. So I think that that will be out a little bit after this episode comes out, I think.
There you go. Yep.
But yeah, the first one's out there right now if you want to grab it. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My name is C McCormack 414. And I spend basically all my free time doing podcasts now. So I have I'm the co-host of a Star Trek podcast called The Penske File, which is where we cover all the Star Trek stuff. We just started season 2 of Voyager, which has been fun. I do the Badass podcast with Sean Murphy, where we cover the animated Batman, the animated series. And I also do a horror podcast called The Rotten Horror Picture Show, where you
gained a new subscriber tonight.
Yeah, I'm excited. Where we talk about movies off the 200 best horror movies of all time list from Rotten Tomatoes, which is a contentious list to say the least. But it's a lot of fun. We've done some really cool movies. So yeah, I think that's it. Is that everything? Jeez. Yeah, I think that's it.